At family company's Christmas party, my wife's sister got a BMW $65,000 car and a promotion. I got a $2 bill and a now jobless t-shirt. Everyone laughed, even my wife. I drove away. Then my wife's dad, the CEO, got an email. "Turn on the news," he shouted. What they all saw make them turn pale. You know how they say timing is everything. Well, however, they are apparently never stood under a crystal chandelier worth more than most people's cars, watching their CEO, father-in-law, hand out Christmas presents like some twisted corporate Santa Claus. But there I was, nursing a whiskey sour that tasted like expensive regret, surrounded by enough fake snow to make a Disney movie jealous. The Whitmore Dynamics Christmas party was always a production. Gerald Whitmore didn't do anything halfway. Not mergers, not acquisitions, and definitely not holiday parties. This year's theme was Winter Wonderland meets Corporate Excellence, which basically meant they dumped a small country's GDP into making our glass atrium look like Elsa's fever dream. 20th Douglas fir in the center, imported from somewhere that probably required 3 different environmental permits. Fake snow machines working overtime because God forbid we rely on the actual December weather outside. And that chandelier. Oh, that magnificent beast of crystal and pretension hanging above us like a glittering sword of Damocles. I should have seen it coming. Should have read the room when Gerald kept glancing my way with that sharp smile of his. Should have noticed how the conversations died when I walked up to the bar. Or how Marla Knox from HR suddenly developed a fascination with her phone screen every time I passed. But no, I was too busy being the good company man, the loyal husband, the guy who built the backbone of this whole operation while everyone else played politics. Sophia looked radiant tonight. I'll give her that. Her silver cocktail dress caught the light just right. And she had that glow people get when they're exactly where they think they belong. She was over by the dessert station with her sister Tessa, both of them giggling like they were still in high school instead of pushing 30. Tessa had this way of throwing her head back when she laughed, all dramatic and attention-seeking, like she was auditioning for a rom-com nobody asked for. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gerald's voice boomed through the sound system, cutting through the jazz quartet and the ambient chatter of 200 employees pretending to have fun. The man had a voice that could command a boardroom or sell ice to Eskimos, which, considering tonight's theme, felt oddly appropriate. If I could have your attention for just a moment. The crowd turned toward the makeshift stage they'd set up near the tree. Gerald stood there in his thousand suit, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch of our little corporate family. Behind him, a projector displayed the Whitmore Dynamics logo in festive red and green, because subtlety was apparently not on the company credit card. As we celebrate another record year, Gerald continued, his arms spread wide like he was blessing the masses. I want to take a moment to recognize the outstanding contributions of our team members. Record year, right? Record year built on the middleware. I designed the routing protocols, I'd optimized the compliance engines I'd coded, while everyone else was busy networking and brown-nosing. But sure, Gerald, tell us all about this record year. Like it happened through executive vision alone, the DJ, some hipster kid with a man bun and an ironic mustache, killed the music on cue. The timing was so perfect, it had to be rehearsed. Tessa practically bounced on her toes, clutching Sophia's arm like she was about to receive the Nobel Prize instead of whatever nepotistic nonsense was coming her way. "Tessa Whitmore," Gerald announced, and the crowd erupted in polite applause, has shown exceptional leadership, creative vision, and dedication to the Whitmore family values. Family values. There's a phrase that could mean anything and nothing at the same time. In Gerald's vocabulary, it usually translated to born with the right last name and willing to smile for the cameras. The ribbon box appeared in Gerald's hands like a magic trick. Tessa squealed. Actually squealed like a teenager getting asked to prom and practically skipped to the stage. The crowd ate it up. Cameras flashed from every angle because apparently this moment needed to be documented for posterity or Instagram. Hard to tell the difference these days. Tessa opened the box with theatrical precision, gasping at the BMW key fob like she'd never seen luxury before, which was rich considering she'd been driving Daddy's cars since she was 16. But the crowd didn't know that. The crowd saw a young executive being rewarded for her hard work and innovative thinking. And with this promotion to Vice President of Brand Strategy, Gerald continued. His voice dripping with paternal pride, comes all the responsibilities and privileges that our senior leadership enjoys. VP of Brand Strategy. The girl who'd spent the last 6 months posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn and calling it market research was now a VP. The same girl who thought synergy was a type of yoga and pivot was something you did in basketball. But hey, family values, right? The confetti cannons went off like we were celebrating New Year's Eve, sending streams of gold and silver paper floating down like expensive dandruff. Some landed in my whiskey sour. I picked out a piece shaped like a star and flicked it onto the marble floor where it joined about 1 million others. Sophia caught my eye from across the room and gave me that look. The one that said, "Be happy for my sister," mixed with, "Don't you dare make a scene." I raised my glass in a mock toast because what else was I supposed to do? Stand up and read my resume out loud. List every patent filing with my name on it. Explain to the room how the technology stack they were celebrating literally wouldn't exist without me. That's when Gerald's eyes found mine across the crowd. That predator smile spread across his face like oil on water. And I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the air conditioning they were pumping through the vents to combat all that fake snow. "But wait," Gerald said, his voice taking on that game show host quality that rich people use when they think they're being charming. "There's one more gift to give out tonight." The crowd turned to follow his gaze, and suddenly I was the center of attention. Great. Just great. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the catering staff paused with their silver trays, sensing drama in the air like sharks smelling blood. Gerald waved a gift bag in my direction, not wrapped like Tessa's box. Just a plain bag from some high-end store. "Come on up here, son," he called out, and the son dripped with just enough mockery to make sure everyone heard it, but couldn't quite call him on it. I walked through the crowd like I was walking through molasses. Every step felt deliberate, measured while conversations resumed in hushed whispers around me. I could hear fragments. Poor guy saw it coming about time and realized that half the room knew what was happening before I did. Gerald handed me the bag with a flourish that probably looked generous from the back row, but felt like a loaded gun up close. "Open it up," he encouraged, and the crowd pressed closer like they were watching a public execution, which in retrospect, they kind of were. Inside the bag, a crisp $2 bill and a black t-shirt folded with military precision. I lifted the shirt and shook it out, the fabric falling to reveal white block letters that might as well have been written in neon. "Now jobless." The laughter started somewhere in the back and rolled forward like a wave, gaining momentum as it hit the marble and bounced off the glass walls. It was the kind of laughter that feeds on itself, growing bigger and meaner with each echo. Even the jazz quartet stopped playing to stare. Sophia's laugh was the one that cut deepest, not because it was the loudest, though it was, but because of how she reached over to pat my chest afterward, like I was a good dog who'd just done a particularly amusing trick. Oh, honey, she said, loud enough for the nearest 20 people to hear. You should have seen your face. I stood there holding that shirt, feeling 200 pairs of eyes on me, listening to laughter that sounded like breaking glass. Gerald watched me with the satisfaction of a man who just won a chess game he'd been playing for months. Tessa clutched her new car keys and giggled behind her hand, like we were at a comedy show instead of a professional gathering. The smart play would have been to laugh along, to make some self-deprecating joke about finally having time for my hobbies. Or now Sophia can't complain about me working late. To turn their cruelty into crowd-pleasing humor and walk away with whatever dignity intact. Instead, I folded that shirt with the same careful precision Gerald's people probably used to plan this little performance. Placed it back in the bag, closed the top, took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. Thank you, I said, loud enough for the room to hear, but quiet enough to sound sincere. This is exactly what I needed. The laughter faltered, confused by my tone. Gerald's smile flickered like a bad connection, because thank you wasn't in their script, and sincerity wasn't supposed to be my weapon of choice. I walked toward the valet desk with measured steps, past Gene Park, who mouthed, "Sorry," with genuine regret in his eyes, past CFO Owen Pike, who raised his champagne glass like he was toasting my funeral, past Marla Knox, who suddenly developed an urgent need to check her clipboard. "Sir," the valet kid asked, probably 19 and working this gig for beer money, looking nervous about getting caught in whatever corporate drama was unfolding behind us. "The gray sedan," I told him, handing over my ticket. "Take your time." No one followed me, not even Sophia. She was too busy accepting congratulations for her sister's promotion and playing the part of the loyal corporate wife. The laughter had resumed behind me, already moving on to the next conversation, the next joke, the next moment of manufactured holiday cheer. But as I waited for my car, keys jingling in the valet kid's nervous hands, I couldn't stop smiling because they thought they'd won. They thought public humiliation was the end of the story. They had no idea it was just the beginning. The garage beneath Whitmore Dynamics felt like a concrete tomb, all echoing footsteps and fluorescent lights that buzzed with the intensity of angry wasps. The cold December air bit through my suit jacket as I walked toward my car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic that looked embarrassingly out of place next to the parade of German luxury sedans and electric penis extensions parked in the executive section. But that old gray sedan was mine. Paid for with honest money, not daddy's trust fund or corporate kickbacks disguised as performance bonuses. The valet kid handed me the keys with the kind of careful politeness you use around someone who might be having a mental breakdown. "Have a good evening, sir," he said, like he was defusing a bomb instead of returning car keys to a guy who'd just been publicly humiliated by his boss or father-in-law. "Thanks, kid. You too." I tipped him $20. Money I probably shouldn't have been throwing around, considering I was now officially unemployed. But he'd been the only person all evening who treated me like a human being instead of entertainment. The garage door opened with a mechanical groan that sounded like the building itself was relieved to see me go. I pulled out into the December night, watching the Whitmore Tower shrink in my rearview mirror until it was just another collection of office lights, trying to make themselves important against the darkness. The party was still going on up there in their Crystal Palace. Probably would until 2 in the morning, because nothing says executive leadership like drinking on company time while your workforce goes home to their mortgages and student loans. My phone started buzzing before I hit the first traffic light. Text after text lighting up the dashboard like a Christmas tree made of corporate condolences and drunk executive emojis. Owen Pike sent a martini glass and a laughing, crying face. Marla Knox went with the classic thinking of you, followed by a prayer hands emoji, because apparently losing your job was now something that required divine intervention. Even some of the junior engineers were chiming in with various versions of "dude, that was brutal," and "sorry, man." I hit the silence button and watched them all disappear. Their sympathy, their after-the-fact courage. Where were these people when Gerald was setting up his little comedy show? Where were they when I was getting thrown under the bus in front of 200 witnesses? Probably thinking about their own job security and wondering if they'd be next on the chopping block. The roads were slick with that kind of winter moisture that makes everything look like a black mirror. I took the long way home, or what used to be home before I started sleeping in motel and planning for exactly this moment. The route took me past the Millfield River, where the city lights reflected on the dark water like a broken necklace. Some rich woman had thrown away in a fit of rage. Seemed appropriate considering how my own life had just shattered into expensive, glittering pieces. I thought about every late night I'd spend in that office building, every weekend I'd sacrifice to Gerald's urgent deadlines that somehow always coincided with his golf tournaments or family vacations. 7 years of building their digital infrastructure from the ground up. 7 years of making Gerald look like a visionary leader, when really he was just a trust fund baby with good hair and a talent for taking credit. The middleware layer that handled all their client communications. Mine. The routing protocols that kept their data flowing smoothly between departments. Also mine. The compliance audit engine that Gerald loved to brag about during federal contract negotiations. Surprise. That masterpiece came from my keyboard, too. Coded during a particularly inspired bout of insomnia, while Sophia complained about me working too much. Family excellence, Gerald had called it during his presentation to the Pentagon. Family excellence like the Whitmore gene pool had somehow produced technological innovation through pure bloodline superiority, instead of relying on the contractors they treated like disposable assets. I stopped at a red light next to a bus stop where someone had graffitied "Eat the Rich" in dripping red letters. Subtle, but I appreciated the sentiment. Especially considering I'd just been fed to said rich people like chum to sharks. The light turned green, and I accelerated past a homeless guy with a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps." I made a mental note to circle back. After tonight, we might have more in common than I cared to admit. That's when I started laughing. Not the polite corporate chuckle I'd perfected over the years, but real laughter that started in my chest and bubbled up like champagne shaken too hard because they thought they'd broken me. They thought public humiliation and a joke t-shirt were the end of my story. Gerald probably went to bed tonight feeling like he taught me a valuable lesson about knowing my place in the pecking order. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to maneuver. While Gerald was busy playing daddy CEO and Sophia was shopping for designer handbags, I'd been building something they didn't even know existed. Something clean, something legal, something that would make tonight's party trick look like amateur hour. My phone buzzed again. Not a text this time, but a call from Miguel Alvarez. Miguel, my old college roommate who'd gone on to become CTO at Arc Vantage Labs, one of Whitmore's biggest competitors. Miguel, who'd been quietly recruiting me for months with the kind of offers that would make a grown man weep. Miguel, who'd sent me a very specific text message 2 days ago. Weather looks clear. Weather looks clear. Our old code from freshman year computer science, back when we thought we were so clever with our secret phrases and elaborate pranks. It meant all the signatures were in place, all the legal documents filed, all the chess pieces positioned for checkmate. It meant the plan we'd been cooking up for the better part of a year was finally ready to execute. I let it ring. Not because I didn't want to talk to Miguel. Hell, talking to someone who actually respected my work sounded like heaven right about now. But because this moment deserved to be savored. This drive through the city that had watched me build something beautiful and then handed me a pink slip wrapped in tissue paper and malicious glee. The radio was playing some generic holiday music, the kind of sanitized Christmas cheer that sounds like it was focus grouped to death. I switched it off and drove in silence, listening to the hum of my engine and the whisper of tires on wet asphalt. The city looked different tonight, like I was seeing it through new eyes, clearer eyes, eyes that weren't clouded by loyalty or false hope, or the desperate need to belong somewhere that never wanted me in the first place. I passed the Thai place where Sophia and I used to go for date nights, back when she actually wanted to spend time with someone who worked for a living instead of inherited it. Past the coffee shop where I'd had my first interview with Gerald, back when he was still pretending to care about qualifications instead of just looking for someone smart enough to build his empire and naive enough not to ask for equity. 7 years. 7 Sagara years of giving that company everything I had. Every innovative idea, every breakthrough moment, every late-night epiphany that moved their stock price another few points north. And what did I have to show for it? A salary that was good, but not great. A wife who laughed when her father humiliated me. And a t-shirt that summed up their opinion of my contributions in 2 simple words. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been filing patent applications under my own name for the last 18 months. Perfectly legal, perfectly documented. All the I's dotted and T's crossed by the best IP lawyer Gerald's money could buy. Ironically, the same firm that handled Whitmore's legal work. Though they kept different clients in separate silos for exactly this reason. They didn't know about North Star Relay, my little LLC that rented space in a brick building across town and had been quietly licensing technology back to Whitmore under terms that looked generous until you read the fine print. They didn't know about the kill switches I'd built into every critical system, the back doors that looked like standard administrative access, but were actually my insurance policy against exactly this kind of corporate backstabbing. Most importantly, they didn't know that the federal logistics contract Gerald loved to wave around like a trophy, the one that was supposed to cement Whitmore's position as a major government vendor, was entirely dependent on my compliance audit engine. The engine that ran on a temporary license that expired at midnight on December 31st, unless certain payment and security requirements were met. Requirements that, according to my very careful documentation, Whitmore had been failing to meet for the past 6 months. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner that specialized in grease and regret. The kind of place where truck drivers and night shift workers went to car blow before facing another shift of American capitalism. The neon sign flickered between open and op-in, which felt like a metaphor for something. But I was too emotionally exhausted to figure out what. My phone lit up again, this time with a text from Sophia. "Where did you go?" People are asking. People are asking. Not, "I'm worried about you," or "Are you okay?" Or even, "What the hell just happened back there?" Just concern about what people might think if the guest of honor at their little humiliation party had the audacity to leave early. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Everything from the honest truth about what I really thought of her family, to elaborate explanations of why I couldn't stay and watch them celebrate my professional execution. In the end, I went with something simple. Needed some air. See you at home. Except I wouldn't be going home. Home was a mortgage on a house I couldn't afford without a job, shared with a wife who'd just proven that blood was thicker than marriage vows. Home was a collection of furniture and memories that belonged to a different version of me. The version that still believed hard work mattered more than birthright. That loyalty was a two-way street. That family meant something beyond shared DNA and financial convenience. Instead, I was going to drive to that brick building across town and make sure everything was ready for tomorrow's news cycle. Because if Gerald wanted to play games, I was about to show him what happened when you humiliated someone who'd spent 7 years learning all your secrets and building all your weapons. The funny thing about being stabbed in the back is that it clarifies everything. All those moments of doubt, all those times I'd wondered if I was being paranoid or oversensitive, all those little slights and overlooked contributions suddenly made perfect sense. They'd never seen me as family. They'd seen me as a useful tool. And now that they thought they didn't need me anymore, they were throwing me away with about as much ceremony as you'd give a broken stapler. But tools work both ways. And tomorrow morning, they were going to learn the difference between owning someone and needing them. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, leaving the diner's neon glow behind me as I headed toward the future I'd been building in secret. The party was over, but the real show was about to begin. The parking lot of 1247 Industrial Way looked like the kind of place where dreams go to die. Cracked asphalt, weeds growing through concrete, and a flickering street light that probably hadn't been serviced since the Clinton administration. But that shitty little brick building was about to become ground zero for the most expensive lesson Gerald Whitmore had ever received. And the best part was that he paid for it himself through 7 years of my generous salary. I slid my key card through the reader. Yeah, that's right. Key card access to a building that looked like it should be condemned, and listened to the satisfying beep that meant I was home. Not home like the McMansion I'd been sharing with Sophia and her collection of throw pillows that cost more than most people's rent, but home like a place where I could finally stop pretending to be someone else's idea of success. The lobby, and I use that term loosely, consisted of a folding table, a dying rubber plant that I'd named Wilson after the volleyball in Castaway, and a motivational poster someone had left behind that read teamwork. Because sometimes you can't do it all yourself. Ironic considering I'd spent the last year doing exactly that while Gerald took credit, and Sophia planned shopping trips to celebrate our achievements. North Star Relay LLC occupied exactly 2 rooms and a server closet on the 2nd floor of this architectural masterpiece. Room 1 was what I generously called the conference area. A card table, 2 mismatched chairs from a garage sale, and a whiteboard covered in coffee stains. And the kind of brilliant scribbles that only make sense at 3 a.m. when you're hopped up on energy drinks and pure spite. Room 2 was the development lab, which sounded way fancier than the place where I kept my good computer and a mini fridge full of Red Bull. But it was the server closet that made this whole operation worthwhile. Behind a door marked authorized personnel only because I had a sense of humor about these things. A rack of humming hardware connected to fiber optic cables that would make NASA jealous. This wasn't some hobbyist setup cobbled together from Amazon Basics. This was enterprise-grade equipment that I'd been accumulating piece by piece. Always paying cash, always keeping the receipts, always making sure everything was legal and traceable and absolutely bulletproof. The smell hit me as soon as I opened the closet door. Ozone from the servers, that metallic tang of Soldair from late-night hardware modifications, and just a hint of the vanilla air freshener I'd hung up to mask the fact that I'd been practically living here for months. Home sweet home population. Me and about 50,000 lines of code that were about to change everything. I powered up the main workstation and watched the screens come alive with the kind of beautiful chaos that only a systems architect could appreciate. Network diagrams that looked like electronic spider webs, database schemas that would make a mathematician weep, and monitoring dashboards that tracked every heartbeat of every system running Whitmore's precious empire. Because here's the thing about being the guy who builds the foundation. You get to decide exactly how strong that foundation really is. The corkboard above my desk told the whole story in 4 neat rows of paper. Patent application 847291A. Distributed middleware communication layer with adaptive load balancing. Patent application 847291B. Resilient Network Routing Protocol with Autonomous Failure Detection. Patent Application 847291C. Real-Time Compliance Audit Engine for Federal Contract Verification, and my personal favorite, Patent Application 847291D. Machine Identity Vault with Cryptographic Chain of Custody, all filed under my name, all assigned to North Star Relay, all perfectly, absolutely, completely legal under the intellectual property clauses buried in page 37 of my employment contract. Clauses that Gerald's lawyers had written to protect Whitmore from employee theft, not realizing they'd created a loophole big enough to drive a Matstanst semi-ter through. See, when you write IP protections that say work product developed using company resources becomes company property, you better make damn sure you define what constitutes company resources. And when the employee in question has been working nights and weekends in his own lab, using his own equipment, solving problems that the company never officially asked him to solve, well, that's when things get interesting from a legal standpoint. I'd been documenting everything for 18 months. Every email thread where Gerald pushed back my resource requests. Every budget meeting where they cut my team's funding while increasing marketing's budget for brand awareness initiatives, aka Tessa's Instagram consulting fees. Every security audit I'd recommended that got shelved because we'll deal with that next quarter. Every time they told me to make do with what I had while they bought themselves new offices and executive retreats to align on strategic vision. Priya Desai, my lawyer, had reviewed every filing, every assignment document, every licensing agreement with the kind of thoroughness that made her worth every penny of her ridiculous hourly rate. It's airtight, she told me last week over coffee in her downtown office that probably cost more per square foot than most people's apartments. They've been licensing your technology for months without knowing it. The moment they breach payment or security covenants, you can revoke access entirely. And oh, had they breached those covenants? The security requirements alone were like a greatest hits collection of corporate negligence, unpatched systems, default passwords on critical infrastructure, administrative accounts shared via sticky notes, and my personal favorite, Owen Pike using password 123 for his CFO credentials because apparently cybersecurity was too complicated for someone making high six figures. I logged into the escrow agent's dashboard and confirmed what Miguel had been hinting at in his cryptic texts. Arc Vantage payment had cleared that afternoon. Not just cleared, but cleared big. 7 figures big. The kind of money that would let me tell Gerald Whitmore exactly where he could shove his now jobless t-shirt while wearing a smile that could power a small city. The license flip-over timers were already set. Midnight tonight. Whitmore's access to my core systems would expire unless they met specific pay-me-ent and security requirements that I'd been documenting their failure to meet for months. At 12:01 a.m., those same licenses would automatically transfer to Arc Vantage under our exclusive partnership agreement. An agreement that Gerald would probably find out about when his morning coffee was interrupted by some very unhappy phone calls from very important government officials. I pulled up the draft email I'd been perfecting for the better part of 6 months. Every word chosen for maximum legal impact and minimum emotional satisfaction, because this wasn't about revenge. This was about business. The subject line was beautifully bland. Notice of license termination due to covenant breach. The body read like something generated by the world's most polite sociopath. Dear Whitmore Dynamics Leadership Team, per Section 9.22 of License Agreement WDL 2024-047, executed between North Star Relay LLC and Whitmore Dynamics Incorporated. This notice serves to inform you that the temporary grace period for compliance violations will end at 01 Eastern Standard Time on December 23, 2024. As documented in our previous communications dated October 15th, November 3rd, and December 1st, the following covenant breaches remain unresolved. Failure to implement required security protocols, Section 4.2. Non-payment of quarterly licensing fees, Section 6.1.b. Unauthorized modification of core systems, Section 8.3. C. Failure to maintain required audit trails, Section 9.1.d. D. Effective 01 December 23, 2021. Access to all North Star Relay intellectual property will be revoked, including but not limited to the distributed middleware communication layer, resilient routing protocol, compliance audit engine, and machine identity vault. This action is taken in accordance with the terms agreed upon by both parties and is non-negotiable. Regards North Star Relay LLC. Beautiful, wasn't it? Cold as a morgue and twice as final. No emotion, no personal attacks, no mention of t-shirts or public humiliation, or the fact that Gerald's family values were worth about as much as a Confederate dollar in a modern economy. Just pure devastating business communication that would hit their legal department like a freight train carrying legal dynamite. The best part, the absolute chef's kiss of this whole operation, was that Gerald had been bragging about that federal logistics contract for months. The one that was supposed to prove Whitmore could handle government-level security and compliance requirements. The one that required real-time audit trails and cryptographic verification of every transaction. The one that was built entirely on my compliance audit engine and would fail spectacularly the moment the engine went dark. I opened a new tab and checked the news feeds, making sure Harper Quinn had everything she needed for her morning bombshell. Harper, the investigative business reporter who'd been sniffing around Owen Pike's creative expense reports like a bloodhound with a journalism degree. Harper, who was about to receive a very interesting collection of documents that would make her Christmas morning feel like, well, Christmas morning. Travel receipts that didn't match any legitimate business meetings, contractor payments to shell companies that existed only on paper, email chains where Owen pressured suppliers into marketing rebates that looked suspiciously like kickbacks when you added up the numbers, and my personal favorite, a paper trail showing how Owen had been billing his daughter's private school tuition as executive education expenses. The SEC was going to have a field day. Martha Stewart went to prison for less. I leaned back in my chair and looked around at this little kingdom I'd built in secret. Coffee-stained white bars covered with architectural diagrams that would revolutionize enterprise communication. Hardware that hummed with the kind of quiet confidence that came from being built right the first time. Patent filings that would make other companies pay me royalties for the next 20 years. Tomorrow morning, Gerald would wake up to a world where his golden boy son-in-law had disappeared and taken his entire technical infrastructure with him. Tomorrow morning, Sophia would realize that her husband wasn't just some grateful employee who should be happy to work for family. He was the guy who'd been keeping the lights on while her relatives played dress-up as business leaders. Tomorrow morning. They'd learn what happened when you treated talent like it was disposable, and then threw it away in front of 200 witnesses. I closed the email draft and saved it to send at exactly midnight. Not because I needed the dramatic timing. This wasn't a movie after all. But because contracts were contracts, and I'd honored every clause right up until the moment they decided to turn my termination into dinner theater. The rubber plant in the corner seemed to approve. Or maybe that was just the way the server lights reflected off its leaves. Either way, Wilson had been a better colleague than most of the people I'd left behind at that party. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, taking one last look at the operation that was about to become the most expensive practical joke in corporate history. Tomorrow, I'd be back to start building something new. Something that belonged to me. Something that nobody could take away with a gift bag and a smirk. But tonight, I had a few more hours to be officially employed by Whitmore Dynamics, and I planned to make the most of them. My phone lit up like a slot machine hitting jackpot. Except instead of coins, I was getting a cascade of digital desperation from the Whitmore family dynasty. Sophia's name flashed across the screen first, probably calling to explain why she'd laughed along with Daddy's little comedy routine, or maybe to ask if I was being dramatic by leaving early. Like watching your husband get publicly humiliated was just another Tuesday night. And I was the one overreacting. I let it ring, then ring again, then a third time, because apparently my wife had never heard of taking a hint. The voicemail notification popped up, and I could already imagine her tone. That particular blend of condescension and fake concern she'd perfected during our marriage. The voice she used when she wanted to sound supportive, while actually telling me I was wrong about everything. Then Gerald's name appeared because of course it did. The man who just handed me a t-shirt proclaiming my unemployment in front of his entire company was now calling like we were old buddies who needed to clear the air. I watched his call go to voicemail too, then immediately light up again because Gerald Whitmore was not the kind of man who accepted being ignored by people he considered beneath him. The third caller was Tessa, and that's when I knew they were starting to panic. Princess Tessa, fresh VP of brand strategy, who probably thought her new title gave her some kind of diplomatic immunity in family disputes. Her text appeared before I could decide whether to answer. It was a joke. Lighten up face blowing a kiss. A joke, right? Because nothing says comedy gold like publicly firing someone at a Christmas party while their wife laughs and their co-workers applaud. Ha, ha, Tessa. Maybe for your next joke, you can explain that one to the SEC when they start asking questions about your well-deserved promotion and whether it had anything to do with actual qualifications or just happened to coincide with your last name. I turned off all notifications and watched my phone go silent for the first time in years. Amazing how peaceful life could be when you stopped letting other people's emergencies become your problems. No more late-night calls from Gerald demanding I fix whatever his latest hire had broken. No more texts from Sophia complaining that I worked too much while simultaneously expecting me to maintain our lifestyle on a salary that was good, but not private school for future kids' good. Instead, I dialed Priya Desai, because when you're about to detonate someone's entire business model, you want the kind of lawyer who charges $400 an hour and earns every penny of it. Priya was the type of woman who wore power suits like armor and could dissect a contract like a forensic pathologist examining a murder victim. She was also the only person in my life who told me the truth about what Gerald was really planning. "I've been waiting for your call," she said, before I could even identify myself. Her voice had that crisp efficiency that came from billing in 6-minute increments and never wasting a second of anyone's time, especially her own. I assumed tonight went exactly as we predicted. T-shirt and everything, I confirmed, settling back into my car seat and watching the brick building that housed my real future. Gerald's got a real flair for the dramatic. Should have gone into theater instead of inheriting a tech company. Perfect. The afternoon wire from Arc Vantage cleared escrow at 3:47 p.m. 7 figures as promised. The second license agreement, exclusive global rights to your patent portfolio, goes live at midnight when Whitmore's access expires. I could hear papers rustling in the background. The sound of someone who had her hergenant together while everyone else was stumbling around in the dark. Miguel Alvarez called my office an hour ago to confirm final details. He sounds very pleased with the arrangement. Miguel, my old college buddy who'd gone on to bigger and better things while I was busy being Gerald's favorite technical whipping boy. Miguel, who'd been quietly recruiting me for months while I was still trying to make things work with Whitmore. Miguel, who'd looked at my patent portfolio like a kid in a candy store and immediately started talking about partnership agreements and revenue sharing and all the things that happen when companies actually value innovation instead of just exploiting it. "There's something else?" Priya continued, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Harper Quinn called this afternoon. She's running the Pike story tomorrow morning. Early edition front page of the business section. She wanted me to thank you for the documentation package. Harper Quinn, the investigative reporter who'd been circling Owen Pike like a shark that had smelled blood in the water, but couldn't quite locate the source. The woman who'd built her career exposing corporate corruption and had been looking for a way into Whitmore's books for the better part of a year. The journalist who was about to receive enough evidence to keep her busy until Easter. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'd been collecting Owen's dirty laundry for months. Every questionable expense report, every suspicious vendor payment, every creative interpretation of business necessity that would make an accountant break out in hives. Bad enough to trigger an SEC inquiry, probably within the week. The shell company payments alone are worth their own investigation. Add in the vendor kickbacks and the personal expenses he's been writing off as business costs. Priya paused for dramatic effect, because even lawyers appreciated good timing. Let's just say Owen's going to need a very good criminal defense attorney. And soon I thought about Owen at the party tonight, raising his champagne glass in my direction like he was toasting my downfall. Pompous bastard probably went home feeling like he'd participated in some kind of corporate team-building exercise, bonding with the boss by laughing at the hired help. Tomorrow, he'd wake up to federal investigators asking very pointed questions about his travel expenses and vendor relationships. "There's one more thing," I said, watching a security guard make his rounds through the parking lot. Flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like he was searching for problems that weren't there. Ray Holt warned me months ago that something was coming. Said to watch my back. Ray Holt, Whitmore's head of security, was old-school law enforcement who'd retired from the FBI to babysit corporate executives and their various legal liabilities. He'd seen enough white-collar crime to recognize the warning signs, and apparently he'd been seeing plenty of warning signs around the Whitmore family tree. Ray didn't say much. 20 years of federal service had taught him the value of keeping his mouth shut. But when he did speak, smart people listened. "Watch your back," he told me 3 months ago, cornering me by the coffee machine during one of my rare visits to the actual office. Things are moving upstairs, not good things. He'd walked away before I could ask for details, but the message was clear. Whatever Gerald was planning, it wasn't going to end well for me. Funny how being right doesn't make you feel better when you're the target. "Ray's a smart man," Priya said, her voice carrying the kind of respect that came from dealing with too many cases where someone should have listened to the warning signs. He probably saw the writing on the wall before Gerald even started planning his little Christmas surprise. Speaking of which, you might want to prepare for some interesting phone calls over the next few days. From who? Everyone. The board will want to know how their star technology just walked out the door. Investors will want explanations for why their federal contracts are suddenly at risk. Gerald will want to negotiate, probably with threats first, then money, then more threats. And Sophia, she paused, and I could practically hear her choosing her words carefully. "Well, that's between you and your marriage counselor." Marriage counselor, right? Because the problem with my marriage was communication issues, not the fact that my wife had just publicly chosen her family's money over basic human decency. But that was a problem for future me to solve, along with finding a new place to live and figuring out what the hell I was going to do with my life, now that I'd burned down my old one. "The important thing," Priya continued, "is that you don't engage with any of them directly. All communication goes through me from here on out. Gerald's going to try every trick in the book. Guilt, anger, intimidation, bribery, and you need to let me handle it. You've got the high ground now, but only if you don't do anything stupid." Stupid like answering Sophia's calls to hear her explain why watching her husband get destroyed was somehow funny. Stupid like listening to Gerald's threats about lawsuits and non-compete clauses that had more holes than Swiss cheese. Stupid like feeling guilty for protecting work that was legally mine while they've been planning to screw me over for months. Don't worry, I told her, watching another security guard complete his circuit and disappear into the shadows between buildings. I'm done being stupid. That ended about 4 hours ago when they handed me that t-shirt. Good. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be very interesting. I hung up and sat in the silence of my car, engine cooling with little ticking sounds that reminded me of a countdown timer. Somewhere across town, Gerald was probably sleeping the sleep of someone who thought he'd won. Sophia was probably removing her makeup and wondering why her husband was being such a drama queen about a harmless family joke. Tessa was probably posting Instagram stories about her amazing promotion and her amazing new car and her amazing life that was built on someone else's work. And Owen Pike was definitely sleeping like a man who had no idea that tomorrow morning would bring very uncomfortable questions from very serious people with federal badges. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number that just said, "Security Chief says hello. Good luck tomorrow." Ray Halt checking in from whatever burner phone security professionals used when they wanted to send messages that wouldn't show up in corporate discovery requests. I smiled and typed back, "Tell the chief thanks for the heads up. Storm's coming." Then I started the car and drove toward my motel, leaving behind the brick building that would tomorrow become the most important address in Gerald Whitmore's rapidly deteriorating life. The radio played soft rock classics, the kind of music that made everything feel like a movie montage. And for the first time in years, I felt like the hero instead of the comic relief. Tomorrow they'd learn what happened when you confused kindness with weakness, when you mistook loyalty for stupidity, when you thought someone's value was determined by their willingness to accept abuse. Tomorrow, the weather was going to be very clear indeed. 11:59 p.m. I sat in my car outside the brick building, engine off, watching the dashboard clock tick toward the moment when Gerald Whitmore's world would officially start falling apart. Funny how the most important moments in life happen when nobody's watching. No cameras, no confetti cannons, no audience of drunk executives applauding your destruction. Just me, a countdown timer, and enough digital dynamite to level a corporate empire. My phone buzzed with a secure message from Miguel standing by. "You sure about this?" Was I sure? Hell yes, I was sure. I'd been sure since the moment Gerald handed me that gift bag with a smirk that said I was nothing more than entertainment for his family's amusement. I'd been sure since Sophia patted my chest like I was a good dog who just performed a trick. I'd been sure since 200 people laughed while I folded that t-shirt and walked away in silence. "Green light," I typed back. The clock hit midnight on my laptop screen. The escrow agent's dashboard refreshed automatically. License status transferred. The ARC Vantage flags flipped from yellow to green, like Christmas lights coming online. Every patent, every piece of code, every digital asset that had been powering Whitmore's record year now belonged to their biggest competitor. I clicked send on the termination email. Somewhere across the city, Gerald's phone was lighting up with automated alerts from systems he probably didn't even know existed. Security protocols failing. Database connections timing out. The compliance audit engine, the one that kept his precious federal contract valid, going dark like someone had pulled the plug on his life support. My phone pinged with another secure message. "We're live. Press release cues at 6 go a.m. Welcome to ARC Vantage." The press release. God, I'd helped Miguel craft that beautiful piece of corporate theater. Arc Vantage Labs announces exclusive partnership with North Star Relay, expanding federal compliance capabilities. Professional, boring, and absolutely devastating once people connected the dots between my patent portfolio and Whitmore's sudden technical difficulties. I walked into the building one last time, taking the stairs to my little kingdom of servers and stolen time. The closet hummed with quiet satisfaction, all those machines processing the transition like they'd been waiting for this moment as long as I had. On the main console, a tiny blue light that had been blinking yellow for months finally settled into steady blue. The hardware key had accepted its new master. It was done. In 12 hours, when Gerald dragged himself out of bed, expecting another day of playing CEO with someone else's technology, he'd discover that his entire infrastructure had vanished overnight. Not stolen, transferred, not hacked, legally revoked, not sabotaged, just business. I grabbed the framed $2 bill from my desk, Gerald's little joke gift that was about to become my favorite decoration, and headed for the door. Tomorrow, I'd be back to start the real work, building something new with Miguel and a team that actually understood the difference between innovation and inheritance. But tonight, I had one more stop to make. The Days Inn on Route 9 wasn't exactly the Four Seasons, but it had two things I needed: cable TV and a deadbolt that actually worked. I'd been calling it home for the past 3 weeks. Ever since I realized that sharing a bed with someone who'd rather laugh at your humiliation than defend your dignity wasn't really what marriage was supposed to be about. The room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and broken dreams, but at least it was honest about what it was. My phone buzzed at 5:47 a.m. with a text from Harper Quinn. "We're running a package at 6:05 a.m. Hope you're ready. Ready, lady?" I'd been ready since Gerald first started treating me like his personal tech support instead of the architect who'd built his entire digital empire. I'd been ready since the first board meeting where he took credit for my innovations, while I sat in the back like hired help. I'd been ready since Sophia started introducing me as my husband who works for Daddy instead of the guy who actually made Daddy's company functional. But yeah, Harper, I was ready. I made coffee with a little machine that probably hadn't been cleaned since Bush was president, the first Bush, and settled in to watch the morning news like it was the Super Bowl and Christmas rolled into one beautiful career-destroying package. The local station was running their usual mix of weather updates, traffic reports, and human interest stories about rescued puppies. But I knew that was about to change in about 10 minutes. 6 hours came and went with nothing. Then 6:02, then 6:03. I started wondering if Harper had chickened out, if maybe Gerald's lawyers had gotten to her editor, if maybe this was all going to fizzle out like a wet firecracker on the 4th of July. Then at 6:05 a.m., exactly, the screen flashed breaking news in letters big enough to read from space. "Good morning. This is Jennifer Walsh with Channel 7 News. We're following breaking developments in a story that could have major implications for federal contracting and corporate governance. Whitmore Dynamics, the technology company that recently secured a major logistics contract with the Pentagon, is facing what sources are calling a compliance crisis following the sudden revocation of critical software licenses. They put Whitmore's logo on screen, that pretentious mountain peak design that was supposed to represent reaching new heights, but looked more like a pyramid scheme's fever dream. The same logo that had been plastered all over the Christmas party while they handed out BMWs to unqualified family members and unemployment to the guy who built their technical foundation. The company's stock has been halted pending investigation into what federal officials are describing as potential non-compliance with security protocols required for government contracts. The license revocation affects multiple core systems, including what sources describe as the backbone of Whitmore's audit and compliance infrastructure. Beautiful. Just beautiful. I could picture Gerald right now, probably still in his silk pajamas, watching his company's stock price disappear while he tried to figure out how his disposable son-in-law had just nuked his entire operation from orbit. But wait, it got better. The screen cut to footage of Gerald arriving at Whitmore headquarters, and holy Amosarskir, the man looked like he'd aged about 10 years overnight. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie was crooked, and he had that deer in headlights expression that rich people get when reality finally catches up with their farkit. Reporters were shouting questions at him like he was walking a perp walk instead of just going to work. Mr. Whitmore, can you comment on the license termination? Sir, how will this affect your federal contracts? What's your response to allegations of security violations? Gerald pushed through the crowd with the kind of forced smile that politicians use right before they resign in disgrace, muttering something about looking into the situation and confident in our legal position. Translation: we're stopped beyond Nalk, and we have no idea how it happened. Then Jennifer Walsh was back, and she had that gleam in her eye that news anchors get when they know they're about to drop a bombshell that'll have everyone talking around the water cooler. But that's not the only story developing at Whitmore Dynamics this morning. Channel 7's investigative team has obtained internal documents suggesting a pattern of questionable financial practices involving Chief Financial Officer Owen Pike. And there it was. Harper's masterpiece, complete with document graphics and everything. Travel expenses that would make a Saudi prince blush. Vendor contracts with shell companies that existed only on paper. Email chains showing Owen pressuring suppliers into marketing rebates that looked suspiciously like kickbacks when you added up the numbers. My personal favorite was the graphic showing Owen's daughter's private school tuition being billed as executive education expenses. Because apparently learning advanced finger painting at Manhattan Prep Academy was crucial to Whitmore's corporate strategy. The Securities and Exchange Commission has announced a preliminary inquiry into these allegations, with sources suggesting that a formal investigation could be launched as early as next week. I actually laughed out loud. Not the polite chuckle I'd been using for 7 years of corporate meetings, but real laughter that started in my chest and bubbled up like champagne. Owen Pike, the same pompous OQ, who'd raised his glass to toast my humiliation, was about to become very familiar with federal prison cuisine. My phone started blowing up, not with calls this time. Apparently, they'd finally figured out that I wasn't answering, but with texts that read like a Greek chorus of corporate panic. Gene Park. They're pale as paper. Systems are degrading. Emergency board meeting in 1 hour. Some random engineer from the networking team. Dude, everything's falling apart. Half the servers are throwing errors. Even Marlowe from HR. Gerald screaming. Owen sweating. Tessa crying. The same Tessa who'd squealed with delight over her unearned BMW and undeserved promotion was now crying because Daddy's empire was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. The same Tessa who texted me to lighten up about her family's little joke was probably realizing that jokes have consequences when you're dealing with someone who knows where all the digital bodies are buried. The news switched to footage of ARC Vantage laps, and there was Miguel looking calm and professional in his navy blue suit, standing next to a banner that read, "Innovation through Partnership." The reporter was asking him about his company's strategic acquisition of critical compliance technology, and Miguel was giving all the right answers about excited to serve federal clients and committed to the highest security standards. Everything Whitmore had failed to do. Everything Gerald had been too arrogant to prioritize. Everything they'd assumed would just keep working because it always had. Miguel was promising to do it right, with my technology, with my patents, with my expertise, properly valued and legally protected. The partnership with North Star Relay represents a significant expansion of ArcVantage federal compliance capabilities, Miguel was saying, and I could see him fighting to keep a straight face. We'd practiced this interview 3 times, and every run-through had ended with both of us cracking up like teenagers pulling off the perfect prank. Except this wasn't a prank. This was business. This was what happened when you treated innovation like inheritance and assumed that smart people would always be grateful for whatever scraps you threw them. This was what happened when you confused loyalty with stupidity and thought public humiliation was an appropriate management technique. The segment ended with stock footage of federal buildings and serious voice narration about increasing scrutiny of government contractors and the importance of corporate governance in sensitive industries. Translation: Gerald's about to become very popular with regulatory agencies, and not in a good way. I poured another cup of terrible coffee and checked the market futures. Whitmore Dynamics was down 18% in pre-market trading, with more bad news probably on the way once word got out about the full scope of their technical difficulties. ArcVantage, meanwhile, was up 6% on news of their federal contract expansion. My phone buzzed with one more message. This one from Sophia. "What did you do? What did I do?" Oh, honey, that was the wrong question. The right question was, what took me so long to do it? I stared at her message for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard while I composed and deleted about 15 different responses. Everything from detailed explanations of intellectual property law to simple statements of fact about who actually built what. In the end, I went with something that captured exactly how I felt about 7 years of being taken for granted, while she shooed for furniture with money I'd earned, and she'd never respected. I stopped letting people laugh while standing on my work. Send. Then I turned off my phone, cranked up the TV volume, and settled in to watch Gerald Whitmore learn the most expensive lesson of his privileged life. The coffee was still terrible. The motel room still smelled like industrial despair, and my marriage was probably over. But for the first time in years, I felt like the person I used to be before I'd started apologizing for being good at my job. And that, as they say in the business world, was priceless. Here's the beautiful thing about corporate meltdowns. You don't need to be in the room to know exactly what's happening. Panic has its own language. And when a company's entire technical infrastructure disappears overnight, that language becomes very, loud, very, fast. I was sitting in a Denny's at 9 a.m., working through a stack of pancakes that tasted like cardboard soaked in corn syrup when the first wave of intelligence started rolling in. Marlonox from HR, the same woman who'd pretended not to see me at the party, was suddenly my new best friend via text message. Gerald screaming at it. Owen sweating through his shirt. Tessa locked in her office crying. Emergency board meeting started 20 minutes ago, screaming at it. Of course he was. Because when your entire business model evaporates overnight, the natural response is to yell at the 22-year-old help desk guy like it's his fault that Daddy's golden goose just flew the coop. I could picture Gerald red-faced and spittle-flying, demanding to know why our systems weren't working, completely oblivious to the fact that they'd never actually been his systems in the first place. My phone buzzed again, this time from Gene Park, the floor manager who'd actually understood what I did for a living instead of just nodding politely during technical presentations. "Boss, man, they're dead in the water. Federal audit portal won't even load. Compliance dashboard showing nothing but error messages. Gerald just asked it if they tried turning it off and on again. Turning it off and on again. Jesus Christ. 7 years of building enterprise-grade infrastructure. And Gerald thought the solution was the same tech support advice your grandmother gets when her email stops working. The man who'd been bragging about family excellence and innovative leadership was now troubleshooting like a suburban dad trying to fix his Wi-Fi. But wait, it got better. The federal contract, the one Gerald loved to mention in every investor call, the one that was supposed to prove Whitmore could handle government-level security requirements, was now at risk because they couldn't self-certify their compliance systems. Because those systems were mine, because those systems were now licensed exclusively to ArcVantage. Because Gerald had been so busy planning his Christmas party humiliation theater that he'd forgotten to read the fine print on who actually owned what. Bloomberg was running a breaking news ticker at the bottom of the diner TV. Whitmore Dynamics Trading halted pending SEC review of financial irregularities. The SEC Harper Quinn had really delivered on her promise to make Owen's life interesting. I watched the business anchor explain how federal investigators were examining a pattern of questionable expense reports and vendor relationships while showing file footage of Owen at some industry conference, looking smug in his $1,000 suit. That same suit was probably soaked with flop sweat right about now. My phone rang, Gerald's number flashing on the screen like a distress signal from a sinking ship. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to him try to sound calm and reasonable while his world burned down around him. "Look, son, I think we may have had some miscommunication last night. Why don't you come in so we can sort this out like family?" Family? The magic word that was supposed to make me forget about public humiliation and focus on being grateful for the privilege of working for people who thought my value could be summed up on a novelty t-shirt. ArcVantage went live on Bloomberg 20 minutes later. Miguel looked calm and professional as he explained their exciting new partnership with innovative technology firm North Star Relay. The anchor kept saying my name, my actual name, not Gerald's son-in-law or the guy from it, and treating me like someone whose opinion mattered, which was a refreshing change of pace. The best part was watching Gerald's empire crumble in real time. No dramatic explosions, no movie-style confrontations, just quiet system failures and regulatory inquiries, and the steady drip, drip, drip of consequences finally catching up with people who'd thought they were untouchable. Sophia finally texted around noon. "What did you do?" "What did I do?" Oh, sweetie, that was adorable. Like I was some kind of criminal mastermind instead of just a guy who'd finally stopped letting people steal his work while laughing about it. Like protecting intellectual property that was legally mine was somehow a betrayal instead of basic self-respect. I stared at her message for about 10 minutes, typing and deleting responses while my pancakes got cold. Everything from detailed explanations of patent law to simple statements about what happens when you treat talent like it's disposable. In the end, I went with the truth because sometimes the truth is the sharpest weapon you can use. I stopped letting people laugh while standing on my work. Send. Gerald's call came at exactly noon, because apparently, even in the middle of a corporate meltdown, the man still believed in power lunchtiming. His voice had that dangerous, quiet quality that rich people use when they're trying not to scream at the help in public. Controlled, measured, and absolutely seething underneath. "You come here now," he said, not bothering with pleasantries or even basic human decency. Just a command from the lord of the manor to his rebellious peasant because Gerald Whitmore didn't make requests. He gave orders and expected them to be followed by people who knew their place in his carefully constructed hierarchy. "No," I said, and the silence that followed was so complete, I could practically hear his brain short-circuiting. "But I'll meet you in the lobby in an hour. Bring your lawyer." I hung up before he could respond, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play by someone else's rules. Gerald was used to people jumping when he called, scrambling to fix his problems while he took credit for their solutions. Well, surprise, Gerald. Your favorite fixer just became your biggest problem. The lobby of Whitmore Dynamics was all marble and glass and aggressive corporate masculinity designed to intimidate visitors and remind employees exactly who signed their paychecks. Under normal circumstances, I would have felt small walking into that temple of inherited wealth and purchased power. Today, I felt like David walking into Goliath's neighborhood with a slingshot and absolutely nothing left to lose. Priya Desai arrived 10 minutes before me, looking like the kind of lawyer who charged $400 an hour and earned every penny through pure competence and calculated ruthlessness. She carried a slim folder that contained enough legal documentation to end Gerald's career and probably his legacy. All organized with the precision of someone who'd built her reputation on making powerful men very uncomfortable. Gerald showed up with his own legal team. 3 guys in identical suits who looked like they'd been cloned in some corporate law laboratory. Behind them shuffled Owen Pike, looking like a man who'd spent the morning getting acquainted with federal investigators and their very pointed questions about creative accounting practices. Bringing Owen was a tactical error, but Gerald had always confused intimidation with strategy. This is what's going to happen. Gerald started trying to project the same authority that worked on board members and government contractors. You're going to undo whatever technical tantrum you threw last night. We're going to pretend this never happened. And maybe we'll discuss bringing you back at a reduced salary. A reduced salary. This Rarsk guy, his entire company was circling the drain. Federal investigators were probably setting up camp in his CFO's office, and he was still trying to negotiate from a position of strength he didn't have. Counter-offer, I said, opening Priya's folder and laying out the documents like I was dealing cards in a poker game where I held all the aces. You acknowledge that I own the patents for every piece of technology, keeping your company operational. You admit that you've been in breach of licensing agreements for 6 months. And you stop pretending this is about family loyalty instead of corporate theft, patent applications, license agreements, payment default notices, security breach reports that I've been filing for months while they ignored every recommendation, cease and desist orders that had already been served. The paper trail was so complete it could have been used as evidence in business school about how not to manage intellectual property. Gerald's face went through about 15 different colors before settling on a shade of pale that matched the marble floors where his employees had laughed at my humiliation just 12 hours earlier. That's when Tessa stumbled in. Mascara smudged like she'd been crying for hours, looking like a kid who just learned that actions have consequences. "Can't you just make this go away?" she pleaded. And the desperation in her voice was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost. "Make what go away, Tessa?" "The patents I filed legally, the contracts your father breached, the federal investigation into your CFO's creative bookkeeping, or just the fact that your family thought you could humiliate me and I'd keep building your empire for free." Sophia appeared behind them, like a ghost at her own funeral, still wearing that silver dress from the party because apparently crisis management didn't require a costume change. Her arms were folded across her chest in that defensive posture she used when she knew she was wrong but wasn't ready to admit it. "We're family." Gerald tried one more time like magic words that would undo 18 months of careful legal preparation. "No," I said, standing up from the marble bench where they'd probably imagined I'd beg for forgiveness. "We're not. Family doesn't hand out unemployment notices as party favors. Family doesn't laugh while you destroy someone's career for entertainment." In the glass reflection of the lobby windows, I could see myself tired. Yes. But finally standing straight instead of hunched over an apology for existing. Finally looking like someone who knew his own worth instead of accepting whatever value other people assigned to him. "You don't get to hold the ladder and mock the person on it," I told them. gathering Prius's documents while Gerald's lawyers whispered frantically in his ear about liability and damages and all the expensive consequences of treating employees like disposable assets. Not anymore. I walked toward the exit while they stood there in their expensive clothes and inherited power. Finally, understanding that some bridges can't be rebuilt after you've burned them yourself. Arc Vantage Labs turned out to be everything Whitmore Dynamics pretended to be. Actual innovation instead of inherited mediocrity, real teamwork instead of nepotistic circle jerks, and leadership that understood the difference between taking credit and earning it. Miguel gave me a corner office with windows that actually opened, a development team that didn't need their hands held every 5 minutes, and the kind of budget that made Whitmore's penny pinching look like exactly what it was. Rich people being cheap with other people's talent. The lab itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Clean workstations, state-of-the-art hardware, and coffee that didn't taste like it had been filtered through someone's gym socks. No fake snow machines or crystal chandeliers or motivational posters about synergy. Just smart people doing smart work and getting paid what they were actually worth. My first hire was Gene Park because loyalty deserves to be rewarded when it goes both directions. I offered him a signing bonus that was more than Whitmore had given him in annual raises over 3 years, plus equity in the projects he'd actually be building instead of just maintaining. Gene took one look at the offer sheet and started laughing. The good kind of laughter, not the cruel kind I'd been subjected to at Gerald's party. "You know they're calling you Lucifer over there," Gene told me during his first week setting up his workstation with the kind of care that comes from finally having tools that match your skill level. Mara from HR keeps talking about how you betrayed the family trust. Family trust, right? Because trusting your family not to publicly humiliate you was apparently too much to ask. But expecting you to keep building their empire after they treated you like garbage was just natural family dynamics. We started a helpline for smaller vendors who'd been getting squeezed by Owen's kickback schemes. Companies that had been forced to choose between paying bribes disguised as marketing fees or losing their Whitmore contracts entirely. Turned out there were a lot of them, and they all had stories about Owen's creative interpretation of ethical business practices. My apartment above Rossetti's cafe was nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, a kitchen the size of a closet, and a view of the alley where they kept the dumpsters. But it was mine, paid for with clean money, and the old Italian couple who ran the cafe downstairs made the kind of coffee that actually improved your day instead of just keeping you awake. Mrs. Rossetti had adopted me like a stray cat, bringing up leftover cannoli and asking why a nice young man like me was living alone instead of with that pretty wife from the pictures. I stopped showing her pictures of Sophia after the divorce papers were filed. Harper Quinn won a state journalism award for her series on Whitmore's financial irregularities. The ceremony was covered on local news, and I watched from my little apartment while eating takeout Chinese and feeling genuinely proud of someone else's success. For the first time in years, she'd taken my documentation and turned it into the kind of investigative masterpiece that actually changed things. Owen was facing federal charges. Gerald was dealing with shareholder lawsuits. And Whitmore Dynamics was hemorrhaging clients faster than a punctured pipeline. Late at night, I'd tape Gerald's $2 bill above my desk, not as a reminder of being hurt, but as a measuring stick. Never again would I accept less than my actual value. Never again would I build someone else's empire while they handed out BMWs to unqualified family members and unemployment notices to the people who actually did the work. Priya introduced me to a pro bono clinic downtown where small business founders came for help protecting their intellectual property from exactly the kind of corporate theft I'd spent 7 years enabling. Twice a month, I'd volunteer to review contracts and patent filings, helping other people avoid the mistake I'd made of trusting family to treat you like family. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't personal. It's making sure the next guy doesn't get screwed the same way you did. 1 year later, I was hosting my own Christmas party in the Arc Vantage Lab. And what a difference a year makes when you're surrounded by people who actually deserve to be there. Miguel brought his famous tamales, the ones his grandmother taught him to make before she died. Not some catered nonsense from a company that charged by the fancy napkin. Jean had somehow managed to rig the coffee machine to dispense hot chocolate, because apparently being a networking genius also made you a beverage wizard. Priya showed up with a bottle of champagne that cost more than most people's car payments. And Harper Quinn brought her journalism award because she was proud of it and wanted to share the moment with people who had helped make it possible. Even Mrs. Rossetti from downstairs had joined us, carrying a tray of her legendary cannoli and complaining in her thick Brooklyn accent about how we were all too skinny and needed to eat more. "You boys work too hard," she kept saying, forcing second helpings on everyone while the news played softly in the background. It was the kind of Christmas gathering that actually felt like celebration instead of corporate theater. Real laughter instead of the performative that I'd endured at Whitmore's Crystal Palace. People who were there because they wanted to be, not because their paychecks depended on it. That's when the breaking news alert cut through our conversation like a knife through wrapping paper. Whitmore Dynamics to be acquired in distress sale following year-long compliance crisis and federal investigation. Stock down 73% from pre-crisis highs. The room went quiet, except for the soft hum of servers and Miguel's barely suppressed snort of laughter. On screen, they were showing file footage of the Whitmore building, the same glass tower where I'd spent 7 years building other people's dreams while they planned my destruction. Catastrophic dependency on revoked intellectual property licenses, the anchor was saying. Reading from notes like she was delivering someone's obituary. Regulatory penalties have frozen the company's federal contracting pipeline, while ongoing SEC investigations into financial irregularities have spooked investors and triggered multiple shareholder lawsuits. My phone buzzed with a group text to the old Whitmore family thread, the one I'd forgotten to leave because, honestly, I'd been too busy succeeding to remember they existed. Gerald had written, "Turn on the news." I pictured them sitting in that marble atrium where they'd laughed at my expense 12 months ago. The same floor that was probably now reflecting a row of gray faces as they watched their empire get sold off piece by piece to pay for Gerald's mistakes and Owen's legal fees. The same chandelier that had sparkled above their cruel laughter, now lighting up their corporate funeral. Tessa was probably crying again. Real tears this time. Not the fake drama she'd performed when her unearned promotion couldn't protect her from the consequences of treating people like entertainment. Sophia was probably wondering if she should have defended her husband instead of her family's money. But that ship had sailed the moment she chose to laugh instead of stand up. I looked at the tiny $2 bill in its frame on my desk. Gerald's joke gift that had become my favorite reminder of exactly how much I was worth to people who thought net worth was the only worth that mattered. That wrinkled piece of legal tinder had watched me build something real. Something mine. Something that nobody could take away, with a gift bag and a smirk. Miguel raised his champagne glass in a toast that felt nothing like Owen Pike's mocking gesture from that awful night. "To building things that last," he said. And everyone clinked glasses while the TV droned on about distress sales and federal penalties and the spectacular fall of people who'd confused inheritance with intelligence. Harper was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "You know what the best part is?" she said, gesturing at the screen where financial analysts were dissecting Whitmore's collapse with surgical precision. "They're using your patents as case studies in business schools. Now, how to protect intellectual property in corporate partnerships. You're literally teaching the next generation how not to get screwed." "Mrs." Rossetti patted my shoulder with flour-dusted hands and said something in Italian that I'm pretty sure translated to, "Good for you, kid." She She'd never understood exactly what I did for a living. But she understood the difference between people who worked for what they had and people who just expected it to be handed to them. I didn't need their applause anymore. Didn't need Gerald's approval or Sophia's validation or Tessa's fake friendship. I had something better. A team that respected my work. A future I'd built with my own hands. And the satisfaction of knowing that they'd finally learned what value looks like. It just took destroying their lives to teach them the lesson.